And we say asuyutit for hello.
This is how you say hello in Mi'kmaq. We.
Ganche.
Ganche.
Southern Shoshone.
How you say hello in our language is Sagoli, or Sagoli Swagweke for everyone.
How you say hello in Blackfoot is Ukki.
We are from Cochiti Pueblo.
Goetze Hopa.
Kolamalsi. Yep, that's how you say hello. Dante. Yeah, Dante.
This is how you say hello in Ojibwe, Ani.
This is how we say hello, Tanse.
Saigon.
Scano. Buju.
Inu, and to say hello is Etili Hai.
And how do you spell it?
I have no sweet clue.
People from Siksika Nation in southern Alberta say it's getting windier.
Living in a valley, you can get those extreme winds, especially when it's coming down a hill. And we have a lot of roads that are going up hills and down hills.
They're seeing the impact of climate change on the landscape.
It never used to get this windy. And a few years ago, we had a windstorm that took the rooftops off some houses on the east end.
Now the community is turning to a century-old farming practice to combat this new challenge. Soon, this bare prairie landscape will include rows of trees, otherwise known as shelter belts. The plants serve as natural wind barriers, shielding homes, livestock, and people from bitter prairie winds. Shelter belts aren't new to Alberta. In 1903, the federal government launched a national shelter belt program as part of its bid to attract farmers to the prairies.
A landowner can just ask for some free trees and they would come back and plant them, and they would really increase that kind of land cover.
Over 1 billion seedlings were handed out before the program ended in 2013. Even though the program didn't explicitly exclude First Nations, a technicality prevented farmers living on reserve from receiving free trees.
Because they didn't own it the same way, you couldn't say, this is my township and range and my address, please send the trees to this area, and then you'd go to town and pick them up and plant them on your land.
Now, more than 100 years after the program started, that's something that Siksika is changing. The First Nation is planting rows and rows of trees with the help of Edmonton-based nonprofit Project Forest. Together, they decided on 14 species of trees that will survive the area's conditions.
We picked to plant hundreds of thousands of Okanese poplar at our Siksika Nation Community Shelter Belt project because of all the poplars out there, this performs the best in full sunlight, lots of heat, and limited amounts of moisture.
But the reality is, not all the trees planted will take root.
Siksika has tried to grow trees before, and sometimes not super successfully because it's a very challenging climate.
Next year, these seedlings will be planted in Siksika Nation. Right now they're small, but in about 10 years, they could look as big as the shelter belts at the University of Saskatchewan School of Agriculture.
This is a nice long shelter belt, double rows of Siberian elm, a tree species that they brought from Europe that came over and fit well into this prairie climate.
And match the increasingly hot and dry conditions climate change is bringing to the prairies. In addition to blocking wind, they trap snowdrift, hydrating soil during the spring melt when crops are beginning to sprout.
It's the drier weather that we're seeing too in the summer and the spring, the early melt off, the less rain, it's impacting our grounds.
Once the trees are planted, Siksika plans to incorporate edible plants like Saskatoon berries, raspberries, and medicinal plants that have disappeared from the area.
Our relationship with all living beings is as equals. So to see them coming back, it's like they're coming back home, is what one elder said. He said in Blackfoot, they're coming back home.
Stephanie Cram, CBC News, Siksika Nation.
Hi, I'm Samantha Schwentek, reporter for CBC Indigenous here in Edmonton, and I'm with local climate reporter Stephanie Cram. You did the piece on shelter belts that we just saw. What led you to want to tell that story?
Well, initially I was asked to research shelter belts, and so a shelter belt is a row of trees that usually lines an agricultural field or a property to help with wind and drought. And so I was looking into this, and I was thinking to myself, is this an innovation that's used on First Nations? Because often when you drive through reserves in the prairies, you'll notice that there's not a lot of trees. And so sure enough, I was looking into it and found Siksika Nation had just started working with Project Forest as a way of bringing trees onto their nation's land. And that's how I came across this story.
Okay, and you had lots of great voices in this piece, which means there must be lots of stuff that got left on the cutting floor. Any favorites?
Yeah, in speaking to Eldon Weaselchild, he's working on the project and he's what he calls an elder in training. So his involvement in the project is interviewing elders from the community to ask what trees and plants they want to see incorporated into the shelter belt. And so Eldon told me a really cool story that his uncle was a trapper and he used to keep a journal and take photographs of animals that he'd see migrating through the lands, and a lot of those animals stopped coming back to the nation. So for Eldon, he's hoping that these trees will not only encourage more plants and trees on the land, it'll also perhaps encourage animals to return to where they once were.
And you mentioned too that this is a little bit of a technology story in some ways. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, in speaking to Colin LaRock, he said that what's unique about First Nations is that they're thinking well into the future, 7 generations down the line kind of thing. So that's their mentality. And for them, instead of relying on technology like carbon capture or other technology heavy initiatives to fight climate change, they're looking to a century-old agricultural practice. It's as simple as planting some trees. So for him, it says a lot about the direction that the First Nation is taking on this issue.
Yeah, and one other thing is that you mentioned in the piece a little bit that in the early 1900s and throughout the program, First Nations did not qualify to install shelter belts. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened?
So in 1903, the federal government launched a national shelter belt program, and basically anyone who owned property, who owned some fields, could reach out to the government and ask for trees to plant on their property. And so the big thing, as Colin LaRock was telling me, was that it's a bit tricky on First Nations because reserve land is Crown land. So it wasn't as easy as just calling up the government saying, hey, send me some trees, because technically they don't own the land. So that's where the trickiness comes into play.
Our relationship with all living beings is as equals. So to see them coming back, it's like they're coming back home, is what one elder said. He said in Blackfoot, they're coming back home.
Thank you so much for this wonderful piece and for having this chat with us. And thank you for watching this playlist focused on stories about the land.
Danse, Anin, Boujou, hello and welcome.
It's really fascinating that we can still use our language in this day and age.
Canada, go talk to Ali.
I always think about my audience. They always on my mind.
Thank you to Inuit who have always been sharing their stories.
That's the story of our people, never giving up.
The ravens of Old Crow see what's happening. People getting ready to go to the mountain. Hunters long worried, now energized. Because look, up there on the range, the porcupine caribou herd finally spotted. Inexplicably late, arriving here in curiously smaller numbers, but to be seen at all, a relief. Charging ahead, Old Crow's Deputy Chief Paul Josie, a dad and hunter anxious about changes in the landscape, some so simple.
You see where the caribou kind of come down this way.
I guess if you've got a big caribou snout, it's easier, right?
And their hooves.
Digging around for snow-buried lichen, the caribou's crucial food. Problem is, when the weather's warmer, rain or wet snow forms ice on top of it.
So if the ice forms over the lichen, then the caribou can't get it, eh?
Well, right now they got so much snow to remove, and that burns energy. And then they hit that layer of ice.
Yeah.
And then they got to break the ice just to get to the plants.
So it's not worth it for them.
It's harder because they're trying to conserve as much energy.
Food blocked by ice can steer them away from these grounds. So can this willow shrub choking the trails. This may be part of why the caribou's patterns seem to be shifting.
Climate change, a lot of water is coming down and it also dries up, but there's also a lot of growth because we have longer periods of warmth, and a lot of the soil's got a longer active layer, so the willow just grows rapid and grows thicker. It's taking up a lot of nutrients. Like, animals can get through it, but not easily, that they'll try to avoid it, and that changes their path.
And the shrub is everywhere, crowding out berry patches. Some berry harvests were thin this year after a record-breaking hot, dry summer. The apparent effects from a shifting climate visible mountainside and in the exceptionally low riverbeds. The Chinook and chum salmon haven't returned in needed numbers. The warmer, wetter conditions leading to more permafrost thaw, drained lakes and slides, known as thaw slumps. This land is struggling, enough that Old Crow became among the first Indigenous communities to declare a climate emergency in 2019, which means anxiety for those who live here about food insecurity and what may be next. Lorraine Nitro, raised in Old Crow, an elder now, hanging on to traditions and a thought. Climate changes may not be entirely of this community's doing, but part of any solution is just outside her window, an ambitious solar project.
What do they offer you here?
They offer us clean energy. We've always been diesel reliant. We live in the Arctic, so in the summertime, in the summer months, we have 24 hours of daylight. And so this is really the perfect opportunity.
This is in your front yard, right? These solar panels. This is not natural. This is not a natural part of the landscape.
It took some getting used to. I look out my front window and this is what I see. The solar project right on our berry patch. We had to make that decision as elders in this community and how are we going to be part of the solution. When they were turned on this past spring and I felt a sense of pride.
Is it any wonder? Because through a climate-conscious lens, there's an uncomfortable reality here. Like all off-grid northern communities, Old Crow relies on diesel, which is flown in several times a year. Fuel burned just to bring in more fuel. The emissions produced from using all that diesel equivalent to 500 transatlantic flights a year. The constant low hum, that's the community's soundtrack for nearly 5 decades. But when the solar panels turned on this summer, the generators turned off for the very first time. That will mean a savings of 189,000 liters of fuel over a year. Old Crow can go further, is gathering data on wind power to get through the dark winters. And even that annoying willow shrub happens to be an excellent biofuel. Determining how to harvest it is the next project. Just maybe the diesel generators will soon turn off entirely.
We're just trying to make these changes to start a ripple effect. That we can make these changes, a small little community up in the north, to make these big changes that we could try and make our difference and our impact.
And when that's on the ground, then it freezes over, it covers the...
At a camp on the mountainside, elders like Lorraine and young leaders talk of the future. Regardless of what the rest of the world does, Old Crow vows to be carbon neutral by 2030.
But I do believe that in the future, like, this is the only fighting chance that we have, because like the reality is you won't be able to depend on gas forever. Like, everybody knows that, and losing my train of thought with the shots.
It's such a good sound.
Faint pops of gunshots in the distance entirely change the mood. They know the hunters have succeeded.
You know that we still practice our way of life, and the land is our teacher.
Absolutely.
And just hearing those shots, it's really emotional.
Yes.
Those who hunt feeling responsible for making sure all of Old Crow eats this winter, knowing the herd may be here fleetingly. Whatever they gather, they share. Good news for the ravens, too.
It's really fills my heart with joy. You know, I got 3 grandsons, and they like the taste of caribou and moose, and there's certainly going to be chowing tonight, that's for sure.
Mary Jane Moses, so emotional at the sound of those shots, so calm at home working with the meat.
Is pride the right word to describe how you might feel about your community and the innovation?
Yes, for sure, yeah, really. I hope that when people see this on TV, that they get motivated to make change in their community, and good changes, and so that we can adapt to climate change and still practice our way of life.
This is the balance they want, and the balance they know the rest of the world needs. And just maybe Old Crow has to lead the way.
We're on our way to Hot Springs Cove in Maquina Marine Provincial Park. It's north of Tofino in the northwestern edge of Clayoquot Sound. We're hoping to learn more about the changes that the Ahousaht First Nation are making within the park alongside BC Parks.
Ahousaht Adventures, Wapuk. I think I'm gonna go inside Vargas, inside Flores up to the springs.
Copy that, thank you, have fun.
As you travel north into the heart of Clayoquot Sound, the busy surf shops and restaurant patios of Tofino quickly fade away. Out here, the truly wild West Coast reveals itself. It's the experience that thousands of people from across the globe seek every year when they visit the west coast of Vancouver Island. The sheer number of tourists is part of why the Ahousaht First Nation has taken more control over how many get to visit parks like this one.
This land is ours, and so Hot Springs Cove is a core part of Ahousaht First Nation traditional territory. It's nice to be here with so few guests and to really enjoy the springs. For me, it's been several years since I've been here because it can get too busy.
Tyson Atleo is a leader with the Ahousaht First Nation. He's been working closely with BC Parks to ensure the interests of the nation are being taken into consideration.
So the changes that we have collaborated with BC Parks to implement include restricting the number of commercially permitted operators. So the Ahousaht First Nation commercial operators have exclusive access from sunrise to 11 a.m. every day.
Commercial tour companies can now only bring 1 boat per day, with a maximum of 12 guests on board. The nation runs day-to-day operations in Hot Springs Cove, though the lands remain in the hands of the provincial government. Like many First Nations across the country, after colonization, the Ahousaht were largely shut out of decisions made about their land, even though they never signed it away in a treaty.
Well, long before visitors came to this region, the hot springs were, of course, a cultural site for my First Nation. And so our people have visited here for time immemorial, for as long as we know, enjoying the springs. And then as time went on, it went relatively unmanaged for a period of time, and many agree that the springs became overcrowded.
You can see how busy it was earlier, and we were like almost waiting to get a spot, so now it's really nice.
And so you'd have days here where you'd have lineups to enjoy the springs, and that's just not really what this place represents.
You took a dip today in the springs?
Yeah.
How was that?
It was magical. It had been some time since I've done it. It was rejuvenating, it was inspiring. We hope that when people come to visit here, they understand that there are precious places like this around the world that really deserve our care and attention and deserve our protection and careful management.
Restricting the number of people at Hot Springs Cove isn't just to create a better recreational experience. This is a wild place, and the crowds were starting to take a toll. These restrictions are new as of this summer, put in place by House It and BC Parks, and they are still open to change.
How busy was Hot Springs Cove prior to those changes?
It's hard to imagine, but we were seeing upwards of 30 to 32,000 visitors annually. There were days where there were over 300 people arriving at the park, sometimes 75, 80 people waiting to get into the pools at once. And you might have seen the pools, they're quite small. Some people are bathing with soaps, and you have enough of that, and all of a sudden you're starting to see the loss of certain species. And I only have a team, there's myself and 2 other rangers out here, so we are spread thin. Having a House It Guardian team is really, I can't say enough about how happy I am that there are additional eyes and ears on the water and in the park. And that was one of the big priorities after COVID, was that BC Parks and House It started to develop a visitor use management strategy. So these are interim permit conditions that will be in effect until February of 2024, at which point we're hoping that the visitor use management strategy will have a little bit more rigor for us to put in place some more maybe permanent permit conditions for these operators. Government takes time sometimes to do things, and this is a huge industry. There's a lot of money involved in hot springs tourism. You have to make the right decisions for everybody.
Tourism is big business in Tofino. Those 30,000 visitors that came to the springs each year represented real money in the hands of local companies. And the commercial access changes at Hot Springs Cove now mean a lot less revenue for those businesses. I reached out to 5 different companies who offered tours to the springs. Most of them didn't want to comment, but one did agree to speak with me about how the changes are impacting them.
It's a pretty big reduction, these temporary access limits. So what's different for you?
Our business would have done approximately a third of our business going up to Hot Springs. And today it's dramatically less than that, about half of what we used to be able to generate. So the opportunity for employees who are seasonal has been reduced a bit. And then our potential to generate income has been reduced a little bit as well. I'm really happy and excited and glad to see the House It Nation working in the management of the park, being unceded territories. We're dealing with reconciliation, we're dealing with just a new strategy and management. So I imagine they're starting in slowly and then seeing where they can go, rather than just have a free-for-all, which was maybe more how it was business model beforehand.
These children are going to be our future drivers for our Hoose adventures.
In order to take visitors to the springs this summer, the House It also launched their own tourism company. Woo! It's the first venture of its kind for the nation. They are now taking part in Tofino's booming tourism economy.
In terms of tourism in Tofino, where do you see Indigenous-led tourism? What kind of role do you see?
I think it's really important and really vital. The nations on the coast are a little bit slow to the show to start grasping on to these tourists and trying to share where they are. Like you're in a house at Hahufli right now, So I see this going in a really, really good direction, considering a lot of awareness just all around the world. Like it's not just in Canada, it's not just on Vancouver Island, it's, we're still here even after the attempt of assimilation. So it's important to come into these industries and leave our stamp there.
The Ahousaht aren't the only First Nation at work protecting the lands and waters here in Clayoquot Sound. The Taloquiat First Nation consider all of the land within their traditional territory to fall within 4 tribal parks. That includes Wanaj's Hilfuas, as it's known in New Channel, or Mears Island. It was declared a tribal park in 1984 as part of old-growth logging protests known as the War in the Woods. We're headed out with 2 tribal park guardians to find out more about what their work is all about.
The Taloquiat Tribal Park Guardians monitor the parks, doing everything from beach cleanups to river restoration to trail building. They are out on the lands and waters, an active and ongoing presence for the nation.
I've wanted to be a park ranger since I was 12. I've always wanted to protect the land. I've always felt close to nature. And when Guardians became a thing, that was more in line and further with my dream. And The role of a guardian is that of a park ranger and more. Part of asserting that you own the sovereignty of the land, you have to go out on the land. It's the most important thing nations can do, in that we have to show a presence on the territory.
Yeah, that's also why they built the boardwalk, to show we still own this land and still use it. So they built this boardwalk all the ways along.
How important is it to you as like a younger Indigenous person to move things forward in that way, in terms of asserting sovereignty and showing that you're here?
It feels great. I feel like I'm really making a difference around here and helping out everybody, trying to help out the nation and everyone else that comes to visit.
Declaring a section of land as a tribal park doesn't mean that everything within its boundaries is suddenly protected. The Taloquiat have declared 4 tribal parks in their territory. They overlap with other boundaries, including 3 provincial parks, as well as Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. Some of the land is still open to logging and mining, but the tribal parks help the Taloquiat assert their presence and influence how this land is used now and in the future.
Can you tell us about how the Taloquiat Tribal Parks came to be?
It was born in 1984 from our declaration from our elders for the Mears Island Aboriginal title court case as a way of articulating what Aboriginal title lands are. Taloquiat prepared an Aboriginal title case to stop the logging on Mears Island, and in court it wasn't a question of how to log, when, or where to log. It was who has the right to issue a tree farm permit. And ever since then, we've been negotiating how we can merge or coexist our Aboriginal title with Canadian title. Ultimately, on the 30th anniversary of Mears Island Aboriginal title court case on the 2014, we declared our whole territory as a tribal park, as a means of sharing and articulating our management of it. We've evolved our tribal parks to articulate our vision for sharing our homeland, our vision for what needs to transform from tree farms to protected areas to protect our culture. It also describes that guardians would monitor the implementation of our tribal park vision.
How different is that vision that Taloquiat have for the land versus the Western vision for the land here?
Good question. So the footprint that's from the provincial government shows that there's tree farms everywhere, which leads to deforestation and broken rivers, impacted fisheries and drinking water. Our vision clearly maps out which rivers need to be restored and salmon recovery programs in place. Our goal isn't sustainability, our goal is abundance.
A new wave of Indigenous-led conservation is on the horizon. First Nations around BC are declaring parts of their territories as something called an IPCA, an Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area. These lands and waters are cared for by a First Nation under their own laws. Each IPCA is unique. Terry Dorward is from Taloquiat. He helped establish their Tribal Park Guardian program. Now he works with other First Nations to create conservation areas of their own.
What is an Indigenous protected and conserved area?
It's a new way of looking at land resource relationships that have become unbalanced because of industrialization. We've had industry come into our territories and completely destroy areas, and who's left standing is the Indigenous people to clean it up. What Indigenous people are coming up with is how do we as Indigenous people not only ensure the well-being of our people, but also the land. As Indigenous people, we've been separated, we've been dislocated, we've been marginalized, we've been dislocated from our own territories. That time is over. The time for reclaiming and revitalizing our roles and responsibilities are now for not only our Indigenous nations, but for solving, this world crisis that we're all part of.
Whether you see it as decolonization or reconciliation, it's a slow process, and it takes hard work. These examples are from the Ahousaht and Taloquiat First Nations on Vancouver Island, but similar efforts are happening all across the country. Here in BC, the government wants 30% of the land protected by 2030, and they are looking to Indigenous protected and conserved areas as part of that. As conversations about land rights and title continue, these parks have a role to play when it comes to reconciliation.
When we started the garden, it was just a good way to not only like have the youth like interact with the medicines, but also we get to learn about like the different plants that like our ancestors used to grow. Hi, my name's Harmony Shkakagan. I'm from Aquimacong. I live here in Ottawa in Algonquin Territory. My clan is Pike, and I'm also an Anishinaabe woman. We actually just wanted like a place to do our garden. This garden wood park, they were so nice to actually offer us a 10-foot square garden. When they found out that we were growing medicines and it was like a bunch of our Indigenous youth super excited, they eventually let us get a bigger plot for our Three Sister garden. And we just keep on growing our garden, so it's really cool. It's like very rare though to see sage. And that's actually one of our most used medicines at A7G. It's one of our most requested medicines. So it's really cool that we actually are able to grow some here, even though they're not like naturally. One of my favorite plants that we're growing here is wingash, which just means sweet grass. That is also one of the 4 sacred medicines. It always like reminds me of how whenever I'm with the sweetgrass, I always think of my dad and basically the 7 generations of my past. So when we braid the sweetgrass, the first strands of 7 strands of sweetgrass, it's actually to honor our 7 generations of the past. Then the second 7 strands is usually supposed to represent like your present, so kind of where you are now, and reminding you of like the 7 grandfather teachings. Then their next 7 bunches is for the 7 generations that are yet to come. So that's like when I'm doing all this medicine harvesting and how our garden keeps growing, I think about all the future youth that are going to be with A7G, and not just next year, but for the next 7 generations, and how they're going to benefit as we continue to grow this garden.
My name is Gerald Zong. I come from Opipwan Napiwin Cree Nation. I am OG Cree, or Ojibwe and Cree. I started helping out with the garden last year. My grandmother actually had a little garden in her backyard, and she was like a very had a green thumb, if you will, like really good at growing different types of things. So we always had rhubarb, carrots, potatoes. She passed away in 2016. So when I went back, for her funeral, I got to see a place where I grew up, and it was like one of those things. I was like, you know what? I want a garden again. So we got abalone here as a shell we usually use for smudging. This one was gifted to me by my mom, and it's part of my little medicine bundle. So when I go anywhere with my medicine, I walk in a good way, hopefully to gain more knowledge, because a lot of it's been taken away from us through the history of Canada. I take care of these like they're my grandparents, whenever I put them down gently, and when I take them with me, it just gives me that a really good understanding of where I came from and where I'm going.
My name is Annalyn Jones. I'm Ojibwe from Garden River First Nation. Grew up here in Ottawa, actually in the West End. One of the first big events that I helped out with from A7G back when I first started helping out was we had a big fall feast, and we probably fed about 200 people, and we were just cooking all day actually at the Branson Center. Me and Gerald actually were cutting carrots for 2 hours, and our fingers were turning orange just to put them in all the dishes, and it felt really nice to be able to cook for people. I'm not a very good cook, but I tried my best, and we tried to include as much traditional Indigenous food, and that always makes people happy when they can have that food here in the city.
I love it. Oh my God, look at this guy.
My name is Melissa Peter Paul. I'm a quill artist from Ebiguit, Gizidasik, Wabanaki. Up until about 6 years ago, we didn't have anybody quilling on the island. My cousin, she's from here, but she lives in Nova Scotia, so when she taught me, I was the first quiller to start back up. So it's been 6 years since I've been doing quill work. So I took that workshop with her and just wanted to keep learning. And as soon as I picked up the quills, it was like, this is what I was meant to do. And you know, you wait all your life to find out what do you want to be when you grow up, and that moment I was like, this is it. It just felt like that puzzle piece was missing. You know, I started doing quill work, I felt like everything was just, my puzzle came together. And I felt like this is what I was meant to do, and the ancestors' presence when I do quill work is so strong. I get all my quills in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So I make trips, special trips over just to collect roadkill off the side of the road. Yeah, so I usually take the roadkill, the porcupine, I put it in a cooler, and I'll take it to a safe spot where I can pluck the porcupine. So it is difficult, because if I was a quiller in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, I'd have porcupine, you know, anytime I wanted. But if I can't get it, then I'm grateful that I can do trades with people, just like my ancestors would have done, you know. My great-great-grandmother, she was a quill artist. So I had the opportunity to go view her quill work in Halifax in the archives and in the museum. So it's a couple generations ago, but being able to follow in her footsteps, I have so much pride that I'm able to look off of her quill work pieces and, you know, and get something from it and be able to keep it going. It's important to me to make the authentic Mi'kmaq quill work and the quill work boxes, because I'm getting that stronger connection when I do it. And that's what keeps me going. And that's when, you know, the ancestors are giving me more information, because I don't have a teacher. So when I'm sitting there with those old quill pieces, it's almost like I'm jumping into a time machine. I've always been really drawn towards the 8-pointed star. Since I was really young. I remember my first regalia had 8-pointed star on there, and then just every year I'm learning something new, but that connection with the 8-pointed star is really strong. I prick myself every time I quill. My fingers are pretty rough, so they don't really get too far anymore. But my son, he could walk down the hallway and get pricked with a porcupine quill, and he's like, "Mom!" But I have people that still encourage me to keep this going, and they support me on that journey. So now we have about 5 or 6 quillers on the island now. So hopefully this encourages more Mi'kmaq youth, Mi'kmaq women, and to start back up making more quill work and more quill boxes, and then next generation will have 20, 30, 40. That's my hope. My children are all a part of my process for quill work. They see a porcupine on my step and they're like, "Oh, hey, Mom's working today." This is their normal, and you know, and that's what I want for my grandchildren, for that to be passed down. So my boys will be quillers.
Yeah, let's put those pins in first, and then we'll.
It's the end of school camping trip for about a dozen high school students from different Regina schools. They've come to Echo Valley Provincial Park to set up camp.
So if you look around here, there's medicines all over, like these ones with the big leaves here.
And to learn from culture advisor Gary Gott.
Is there something stuck?
They're enrolled in a land-based program called Miskasewin Asik.
The name that we went under is called Miskasewin Aski, and it's basically finding yourself, or finding oneself on the land, and finding a connection to the land, and how you connect to it in your own way. And we educate these students on what we know from the scientific perspective, and also from the cultural and spiritual and cultural perspective.
As a knowledge keeper, Gott shares his traditional teachings, including how to study medicinal plants, speak Cree, and tan hides, as well as other basic survival skills.
A lot of them have never been exposed to how to make a fire, how to canoe up, how to paddle a canoe, basic life skills, survival skills, building a quinzhee, We do all-season camping and all-season activities. We expose them all.
You want to avoid that ledge of rocks, so...
The program is open to all students in grade 11 or 12 at Regina Public Schools. They have to apply to attend the classes and teachings. 17-year-old Leah Prosper attends Balfour Collegiate. She loved learning to tan hides.
Our first time fleshing the hide, we were all very sore. Like our arms were... like our arms were just sore in like places we've never worked before. And also when it came to like softening the hide too, that was very physical because we had to drain it, and draining it, it was like a whole process of us just like continuously wrapping it around this thing.
16-year-old Darius Matichuk also attends Balfour Collegiate. The grade 11 student is Cree and is finally learning his language.
Building a connection to the land and like she said, learning the language. We're taking a Cree university credit right now, and like we're learning like basic introductions, like how to say your name. For example, it would be like Tansai Darius Nitsi Gaston.
We realized by the end of it all, a lot of them have kind of woken up something inside of them that kind of reattaches their spirit to the land, and it changes them in many ways.
Campus Regina wants more teenagers to apply to the program. The high school students earn university-level credits in Indigenous studies and the Cree language. And they learn about themselves and the land. Louise Beagle, CBC News, Echo Valley Provincial Park.
We're scraping all the fur off. And then we have to turn it over and scrape the flesh off. So we're done on this side, I think. After we soak it, we'll start on the other side.
Our ancestors did it, and when they're up here, you hear them tell stories about what they remember seeing their grandmothers do or their mums, and they never took the time to learn. I'm Agnes Francis. I'm from Fort McPherson. I'm glad that more and more people are wanting to learn. And when we're up here, like they gain new relationships with other parents, and the kids get to play freely and form relationships themselves.
I probably wouldn't do it if I couldn't bring my kids with me. I make lots with it. I use mine in my sewing. I sew a lot of bags, so I incorporate my own moose hide into the bags. That's part of what I've been doing with my moose hide.
I love being out on the land. Like, I have a camp 5 minutes from McPherson, and pretty much every weekend I'm there.
Yeah, there was more caribou skins from the fall community hunt that they did, and so we thought we'd try caribou skin tanning this year in the spring. Caribou is a lot smaller and a lot thinner, and really easy to work with and handle by yourself. So one person could work with a caribou hide. Our grandmas that used to work with moose hide, it used to just be them by themselves.
It's early morning on the Restigouche River, and Listigouche fishermen have less than 2 hours to get their salmon nets out of the water.
Where are we off to? West End, we're going to check out that area first.
Sherman Isaac is out on patrol. He's one of the Listigouche Rangers, working to protect the river and enforce conservation plans. Fishermen are limited to casting their nets 5 nights a week, from June to late July. Certain parts of the river are off limits and considered special protection zones.
Oh, salmon's the way of life around here. It's our food, it's a necessity, and people feed their families. We're people of the land. We live off the water, we live off the country. We hunt, we fish, and we've been doing this for centuries. And you can almost smell the fish out of the water. When the birds are coming around, floating on top of the water and all of that, you know the fish are around. That knowledge is passed down from generation to generation, and I'm super proud of these guys for keeping it up. and exercising our rights.
The Rangers program emerged from the Listugush community's long fight to protect their fishing rights. On June 11, 1981, 500 Quebec provincial police officers stormed the community to try and bring the salmon fishery to a stop. Equipment was destroyed and a dozen people were arrested. In 1993, Listugush developed its own fishing law, creating the Rangers. Now other First Nations are looking to the program as a model they could replicate.
Well, it's all a big step in self-governance. We want to follow through, protect our lands, protect the fish out there. It's a big step because for the fishermen from the reserve that are out there, they know that they're going to be treated fairly and equally and with respect. Even to this day, from back when in 1981 with the raids and stuff like that, people feel that when they go and fish and stuff like that, they're going to give a bad hand, they're going to be given a bad deal, or they're going to be picked on or something else like that. So it's there to make sure that everything goes through safely for everybody. The stigma will never leave. We need to be able to recognize that we do have rights over here to fish and hunt. When there's violations, just to stop the violation and not go overboard.
The federal government recently reached an agreement with Listugush, officially recognizing the Rangers and upholding the treaty right for moderate livelihood fisheries.
Like as First Nation people, we don't take in an abundance. We don't take more than what we need. It's just to feed the people. So a lot of fishermen out here today, they fish for people that can't fish. Say if there's any conflicts and stuff like that, you know how to communicate with each other, since we're coming from the same community. So as soon as we have the blueprint plan, every other community we can outsource and give that plan to other communities so they can start to develop their fisheries and look after their own land.
Nin, Cecilia Brooks. I'm from St. Mary's, and so I'm the water grandmother with the Canadian Rivers Institute. So what is an elder? That's a question that we have talked about a lot in our, talking circles about how do you identify an elder? What are the traits? It's something that it's a title I think that is bestowed upon you by your community. So when the community begins to call you an elder, then you're beginning to enter into elderhood. And that's been happening to me lately. And at first, I have to admit, it's a little bit, I won't say uncomfortable, it's just kind of odd. It's like a new title, and you're very cautious because it's an honorable title that you don't want to in any way tarnish. So once you have that title, then you have to be mindful of how you're conducting yourself and make sure that you are thinking about the youth and the other people in the community and sharing that information. So we're in Odell Park. And this is where my son Anthony and we come here with, we call them the walkers, and they'll come and sign up for a medicine walk. So we take people on little groups, maybe 10 people, and we walk them through the forest and teach them about the medicinal plants. And I think that plants are, obviously they're critical to the environment. And my whole life, I've always had a relationship with plants, whether it was for food or if it was for medicines, but I always was fascinated with plants. A lot of people taught me. My first teacher would have been my mother. My mother, I guess she must have learned from her mother as well and other people in her life, and her friends, they would teach me. So we would go out foraging. My dad was in the military, And so we lived in other countries, and we always went to the woods, especially this time of year, because my mom always said, oh, there's so much to eat out there in the springtime because the little greens that are coming up, and we go pick them and bring them home and make a nice salad out of them. I have a chemistry degree with a biology minor, but I never took botany. I guess because I thought I was going to go to med school, so I thought animal science is more important. But then I took my first botany course with my son Anthony. I said, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I'd like to learn more about what you do. And so we took a course together. There's things that our elders hold as far as knowledge goes that just isn't in books. And so I talk to the elders and ask them what they know, and I tell them the things that I read, and I show them, and they're always interested, and so they're always willing to share and of course learn too, because some of that knowledge was lost during the residential school system, and of course because of the reserve system, and not having contact with the land outside of the reserve. I think the knowledge, when you have knowledge, I think there's a saying, knowledge is power, right? And that's a nice idea, and it is true. Knowledge is power. But if knowledge isn't shared, it's sort of like a story, right? If it's not shared, then it's gone. It doesn't get passed along. And our tradition is to pass that knowledge on, is so that our people, and we say our people, I don't mean just, my children, we mean all people, humans, all humans, so that they can carry on and they can take care of themselves in a way that's, in harmony with nature. And so, yeah, I want to pass that knowledge on. I want to share it with as many people as we can share it with. And I kind of make a parallel between in the academic world, because I work in the academic world, and you see PhDs and they're experts, right? They're experts. And we have experts too, we call them elders. So the elders, I think it's a requirement. You have to share and pass on that knowledge for the survival of the future generations.